These men may be the two-man clean-up team sent to erase evidence of the killing of Jamal Khashoggi a week after the journalist disappeared in the Saudi consulate in Istanbul on October 2nd. That's according to a Turkish government source who says the two men are a sign that top Saudi officials knew about the crime and that the men arrived embedded with the same group of Saudi officials sent for a joint investigation with their Turkish counterparts. Turkey's vice president on Monday called for an investigation into Turkish newspaper reports claiming that Khashoggi's body was disposed of using acid. Speaking at the UN on Monday, the president of Saudi Arabia's Human Rights Commission confirmed it will prosecute those behind Khashoggi's death. He said King Salman had instructed the Saudi public prosecutor to proceed with the investigation. The United States told the UN that a thorough and transparent investigation is essential. Khashoggi's sons, seen here with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, have issued an appeal for the return of their father's remains, saying their family is unable to grieve without them.
When Han Xiyuan first applied to be a pilot cadet in 2008, she was up against 400 female classmates in China.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is Captain speaking.
She was tested on everything from her English to the length of her legs. Eventually, Han was the only woman from her university that Spring Airlines picked for training that year.
I really don't like it when people add the word female or male in front of the word pilot. We get the same pay and we do the same job.
Now, she flies for Spring as a pilot, but she's one of the lucky ones. With only 1 out of 100 qualified pilots being women in China, the country has one of the world's lowest rates of female pilots. Reuters' Brenda Go is following the story.
The routes for people to become pilots are very narrow, and these recruitment drives that these airlines hold, they only look for male cadets. They only open the recruitment to female cadets maybe once every few years.
But there's a boom in China's middle class, and with it, a growing appetite for travel. Chinese airlines are struggling with a pilot shortage, and according to forecasts by plane maker Boeing, Chinese carriers will need more than 100,000 new pilots over the next 2 decades. So far, rather than reaching out to a qualified pool of female candidates, they've started aggressively hiring foreign captains instead.
Facebook says it fell short by failing to stop hate and violence in Myanmar. Along with a human rights report commissioned by the company and released Monday, Facebook admits they didn't do enough to quash hate speech and potentially questionable content that went on to incite real-world violence in Myanmar. In 2017, the UN says over 700,000 Rohingya Muslims were pushed into neighbouring Bangladesh after a crackdown by the Myanmar army. Reuters' Paresh Dave has been following Facebook's reaction.
For its part, Facebook says it's already taking some of these corrective actions and has made progress. But the report also points out that there's still worrisome signs ahead for Facebook. In particular, growing popularity of WhatsApp in the country could be a challenge.
The report itself warned Facebook it needed to be ready for a possible onslaught of similar misinformation on its platforms during Myanmar's 2020 elections. Facebook says it now has 99 Myanmar language specialists to help stomp out questionable content. Monday's report estimates that Myanmar has around 20 million Facebook users.
A divided America casts its ballots on Tuesday, millions of voters delivering their verdict in a bitter election that amounts to a referendum on Donald Trump's presidency.
If you look at what's marching up, that's an invasion.
I'm Andy Sullivan in Washington, where the balance of power could be very different a day from now.
Let's get it done.
Fired up Democrats are looking to break the Republican dominance at the national and the state levels, but there's a sense that the stakes are much higher than that. Democrats have spent the past 2 years painting Trump as an existential threat to American democracy.
Suddenly people woke up and said, oh, I guess we can't take this for granted. We've got to fight for this.
Trump and his Republicans, meanwhile, are increasingly framing this contest in racial terms, stirring up fears of immigration as they try to hold on to power.
We're not letting these people invade our country.
Trump campaigning on a crackdown, sending troops to the border to stop a band of migrants who are still hundreds of miles from American soil. Republicans also counting on a strong economy, tax cuts, and a successful Supreme Court battle to help them hold on to Congress. But Democrats are riding a wave of grassroots energy. Women who rallied against Trump last year,
This is what democracy looks like.
taking off their pink hats and getting involved in politics. A record number running for office, countless more making phone calls and knocking on doors. More than $5 billion raised and spent, a record sum. Democrats outraising Republicans for the first time this century.
This is where the inspiration is.
The first polling places close at 6 p.m., and we could start seeing results soon after that, a result that will either curb Trump's power or cement his dominance.
Thank you, Georgia. Thank you.
A pre-dawn police convoy carrying one of the world's most wanted men. From a jail cell in Manhattan to a Brooklyn federal court Monday, officials taking no risks that the defendant, who twice escaped prisons in Mexico, might do the same on U.S. soil. The trial of Joaquin Guzman, a.k.a. El Chapo, entering the phase of jury selection, and the judge taking extraordinary precautions to protect the people who may decide the fate of the notorious crime boss. Reuters legal correspondent Brendan Pearson.
Unlike in a normal jury where during jury selection they would be asked their names, their place of employment, kind of details about their lives, where they live, that kind of thing, we're not getting any of that. They're just being called into the courtroom with a sticker that has a number on it, and their name is not being put on the public record at all. Jurors are going to remain anonymous for the entire case.
The judge also ordering jurors be partially sequestered for their safety.
In this case, what partially sequestered means is that the jurors are going to get an escort of armed U.S. Marshals into and out of the courthouse, and while they're in the courthouse, they're going to be sequestered from the public, meaning they're not going to have any interaction with anyone outside of the jury in the courtroom.
Guzman twice escaped from prisons in Mexico, the most recent time through a mile-long tunnel out of his cell. He was extradited to the U.S. in 2017 after Mexican authorities captured him a second time.
He's being held at a special cell in the Metropolitan Correction Center, which is in Manhattan, and that's just because it is the highest level of security that was available in New York City. So he has really minimal contact with anyone. It's basically solitary confinement.
Every time he's moved from his cell to federal court, police have closed a section of the Brooklyn Bridge, roiling morning traffic in America's largest city. His trial is expected to last 4 months. Police say that as head of the Sinaloa cartel, Guzman directed multi-ton shipments of heroin, cocaine, and other drugs into the United States. If convicted, he faces life in prison.
U.S. automaker Ford may have found a roadmap for success in India's highly competitive car market. It's a big prize, set to be the world's third largest auto market by 2020. But it's also tricky for car makers. Many buyers are cost conscious. Though as others have struggled, Ford's been pulling ahead. Last year they posted a profit in India for the first time in nearly a decade. Their strategy? Give local teams more power so they can adapt to fast-changing tastes. It's going in deeper with its local partner, Mahindra, and they're sourcing more parts from within India. 85% of a Ford car sold there could now come from inside India's borders. They've also gone heavy on retail while others pull the plug. They've opened 100 new dealerships there in the last year and a half. It's causing a headache for global car companies who are struggling to edge out the competition. Asian brands like Japan's Suzuki and South Korea's Hyundai are so far leading the way. But Ford's shift in focus and $2 billion investment in the country shows it's willing to take that gamble and put more U.S. cars on India's jam-packed roads.
The Sea of Galilee was once a massive reservoir for Israel. Now, the government is hoping to use water from the Mediterranean to save the biblical landmark from drought and overuse. Christianity holds that Jesus walked on water here, but today he could probably do it without a miracle. Reuters' Dan Williams says Israel sees a solution in desalination.
If the drought dogging northern Israel were to continue, if there was still to be overpumping of the Sea of Galilee, then this island you see behind me would eventually become a peninsula. The government of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is hoping to apply Israeli innovation to the problem. Their plan is to desalinate Mediterranean seawater and then pipe it over into the Sea of Galilee, not just arresting the declining waterline, but in fact restoring the original body of water.
The Sea of Galilee's depletion is having a widespread effect because its waters also flow into the Dead Sea and River Jordan, so those bodies are at risk too.
there is just upstream from us a lock that effectively seals off the water of the River Jordan from the Galilee. Were that not the case, this water would flow upstream toward the lake and would be much diminished itself.
The Galilee is just 1 inch from what researchers call the black line, a level that could leave the water permanently contaminated by sediment. Levels have dropped